the engines of a billion-dollar theft hum in the dead of night. A thin ribbon of road, a hidden depot in a border village, a convoy of rusted trucks. The raw fuel that should keep hospitals, schools and industries running instead vanishes into an underground market. Money meant for infrastructure becomes cash in suitcases. Militias protect tanker routes. Crooked officials open checkpoints for a fee. This is not small-time theft. It is a well-oiled criminal ecosystem stretching across West and North Africa. Tonight, we follow the cartel that turned fuel into fortune and entire states into hostages. The story begins in places most maps ignore. Disputed borderlands, coastal creeks, and sleepy harbor towns. On paper, the flows are simple. Barrel after barrel of refined fuel is produced, transported, taxed, sold. In practice, the flows are hijacked. In a contested zone between Benin and Niger, a tiny village has become a hub for contraband that eclipses ordinary smuggling. Under cover of darkness, convoys roll in from Nigerian coastal ports, where tankers offload stolen product into concealed depots. The cans are reorganized, relabeled, and packed for the cross-border run. By dawn, the fuel has already moved into the hands of local transporters who know every trail, every patrol schedule, and every official who will look the other way for the right price. Across wide stretches of the Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea, the economics of this business are brutally simple. Where retail fuel prices differ sharply across borders, arbitrage becomes irresistible. A subsidized leader in one country can sell for 2, 3, even 5 times as much across the line. That price gap funds the bribes, pays off checkpoints, and rewards the men who shepherd barrels through black markets and back alleys. In a region that consumes millions of liters daily, even a sliver siphoned off the official market equals billions of dollars a year in lost revenue. Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer and the source of much of the region's subsidized fuel, sits at the heart of the operation. Subsidy programs meant to keep petrol affordable have instead produced a perverse incentive. If marketers can buy a cheap product domestically and export it illegally across borders, there is profit to be made, even after paying smugglers and bribes. Former officials have estimated that a significant portion of subsidy funds intended for Nigerians never actually remains in the country. It is siphoned across borders where demand and higher prices make smuggling lucrative. The mechanics of the trade are more. In coastal Nigeria, crude or refined products are quietly offloaded at night, away from official terminals. From there, the cargo is ferried inland to collection points like that border village, where underground storage tanks are buried in farms or behind homes. Local intermediaries buy the product, hide it in innocuous sacks, and dispatch it across the frontier in motorcycles, pickups, and small lorries. In Benin, whole communities have organized around this economy. A complex ecosystem exists that sells cans, provides loading services, looks out for patrols, and runs clandestine fuel stands in towns where formal gas stations are scarce. Smuggling tracks are not the work of isolated opportunists. Over decades, networks have hardened into organized groups with hierarchy, roles, and geography. At the top sit syndicates that coordinate shipments, launder proceeds, and broker deals with foreign buyers. They recruit local transporters and pay informants. They buy influence in border towns and in capital offices alike. Mid-level actors, the crossers, secure routes, rent boats and trucks, and move pallets of jerrycans across rivers and bushland. At the bottom are the laborers, bike riders, casual loaders, and women who refill the plastic containers that carry the product into city neighborhoods. Security forces are meant to stop this, yet in many regions the forces supposed to contain theft and smuggling are implicated in it. There are persistent reports from the Niger Delta to the Cameroon border that soldiers, police, and customs officers either collect regular payments from refinery gangs or actively resell seized fuel for personal profit. In some cases, the same units tasked with destroying illegal refineries avoid doing so, preferring to exact fees instead, where joint task forces are established to fight oil theft. Investigations sometimes reveal collusion rather than dismantling. When seizures occur, the product often resurfaces on the market, routed through other hands. This phenomenon is not limited to one corridor. In the border states of West Africa, Niger, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Benin, analysts have estimated that illegal flows account for a striking share of the fuel consumed. Benin, with its long coastline and limited domestic refining capacity, relies heavily on cheap products from neighboring Nigeria. For decades, the smuggling economy has become a predictable, if illicit, source of supply for people in border towns. Smugglers have embedded themselves into local politics. Powerful local figures, some with connections to formal power structures, allegedly profit massively and, in some cases, influence local governance and elections. Further east, in the Gulf of Guinea in North Africa, the patterns shift, but the logic remains the same. Libya's collapse created a new kind of fuel market. Years of conflict have degraded refining and distribution systems, while militias control refineries and export points. In western Libya, for example, an armed group guarding a major refinery allegedly took a cut of production and allowed product to be exported by fishing boats and small tankers. That fuel reappeared on the European market, often after being blended and repackaged, sometimes under forged certificates of origin. Investigations by European prosecutors traced shipments from Libyan waters to storage tanks in Malta and Sicily. Tankers would switch off their automatic identification systems for hours, reappear in another port, transfer cargoes, and erase obvious trails. In Europe, the product was mixed and sold through legitimate outlets, a final step that converted illicit barrels into cash and made the original theft harder to trace. Organized crime has global buyers too. The evidence from Mediterranean probes shows how international traders, shell companies, and local intermediaries conspired to move millions of liters of fuel out of conflict zones into continental markets. Bank transfers linked to small trading companies and payments to shell entities revealed a business model that is global in reach but local in exploitation. Companies with respectable front operations, seafood distributors, fishing companies, trading houses were accused of masking tanker charters and moving stolen product to storage tanks in Europe. The cargo would be blended and resold, supplying European stations and pocketing large margins, while smuggling syndicates and local warlords back home shared the proceeds. The economic impact at home is dramatic. When fuel that should supply hospitals, schools, and public transport is diverted into illicit channels, national budgets suffer. Governments lose tax and subsidy revenue, which in turn reduces funds for essential services. In countries that depend on petroleum exports or state-managed fuel subsidies, the effect is stark. Less money for roads, healthcare, and education. More insecurity and stagnation. In the Niger Delta, for example, chronic oil theft has not only cost governments billions, but also intensified environmental damage. Illegal refining spills and fires decimate fisheries, ruin farmland, and poison water sources, destroying livelihoods and fueling local grievances. That degradation deepens dependency on the very illegal economy that caused it. The human toll extends beyond environmental harm. Smuggled fuel has been linked to rises in organized crime, arms trafficking, and violence. In some regions, proceeds from illicit petroleum trade fund, militant groups, and criminal networks. The corruption that lubricates the trade undermines the rule of law and corrodes public trust. People working low on the supply chain, like bike riders and small resellers, risk arrest, violence, and economic Women and children are often drawn into informal labor markets around smuggling, a grim trade that can look like opportunity but often delivers exploitation. Governments have tried a range of responses: military raids on illegal refineries, policy reforms to adjust subsidy regimes, cross-border cooperation, and technology investments to track product movements. Some states have invested in more secure terminal operations, advanced surveillance for pipelines, and eyes-based monitoring of shipping. Regional initiatives have sought to harmonize fuel pricing and regulatory frameworks to reduce cross-border differentials that incentivize smuggling. The idea is simple: if prices and access are similar across neighboring countries, arbitrage declines and the payoff for smuggling erodes. Yet these reforms are difficult to implement. Subsidy removal is politically explosive. It can trigger immediate price hikes at the pump and public protests. Harmonizing prices across sovereign states requires trust and coordination that is often absent, and technology, while useful, is only a partial fix when corruption and collusion remain. High-tech tracking does little if corrupt officials turn a blind eye to contraband. When local officials, security services, and elites profit from illicit flows, enforcement becomes selective and reform stalls. In some cases, the criminal groups themselves evolve. A trafficking organization that once focused on diesel for local markets may expand into cross-regional pipelines of product, slip into maritime smuggling, or diversify into other trafficked commodities. They use the same playbook: secure access to supply, cultivate corrupt insiders, conceal movements through falsified documents and switched-off eyes transponders, and launder proceeds through shell companies. The more sophisticated outfits build relationships with international traders and financiers, effectively embedding illegal product into legal markets. Far from the point of theft, international cooperation matters. Therefore, when European, African, and regional prosecutors pool intelligence, trace financial flows, and coordinate interdictions, they can disrupt networks that rely on transnational logistics and money movement. Maritime law enforcement and port authorities, working with inland customs, can close some of the gaps that enable tankers to switch identities and hide cargoes. Financial transparency initiatives, beneficial ownership registries, and stricter due diligence by banks can make it harder to launder proceeds. But cooperation is time-consuming and politically fraught. It requires sustained political will and resources that many states struggle to commit. In the end, tackling the cartel that runs oil smuggling in Africa requires a three-pronged approach: reduce the economic incentives for smuggling, strengthen and depoliticize enforcement institutions, and clamp down on the cross-border networks that launder and market stolen product. That means carefully designed subsidy reforms paired with safety nets for the most vulnerable, better oversight of security forces, customs, and ports, and international pressure to expose and sanction the companies and intermediaries that profit from illicit fuel. But none of that is quick. Between entrenched interests, porous borders, and powerful criminal networks, progress is slow and inconsistent. For every depot destroyed and tanker seized, another route opens and another town reorganizes around contraband. The cartel adapts and expands. Its profits underwrite corruption and violence. Its reach extends from small border villages to trading floors and storage tanks across continents. And yet, the alternative is clear. Leaving the system intact guarantees continued loss of revenue, of governance, and of public trust. Small communities will continue to bear poisoned rivers and burned fields. Public coffers will continue to shrink, and militant groups will continue to find funding in the black market. Stopping the cartel means confronting those who benefit from it. At every level, from the bike rider who carries one jerrycan to the corporate directors who chartered the tankers that ferry stolen fuel across seas. The story of oil smuggling in Africa is not only a tale of greed, it is a lesson in how weak state capacity, distorted subsidies, and the magnetism of easy profit can hollow out institutions and reshape economies. It is a call to action for policymakers, for investigators, and for citizens who must demand accountability. Because the barrels that vanish under the cover of night are more than commodities, they are the raw materials of public life. Schools, hospitals, roads, and safe water, these are what the stolen revenues could pay for. Until the cartel is cut off at its sources, those goods will remain scarce, and the poorest will continue to pay the highest price. This is the criminal cartel behind oil smuggling in Africa, a multi-headed adaptive network that feeds on price gaps, porous borders, and corruptible institutions. It is an economy of theft that spans creeks and capitals, coastal harbors and European ports. To dismantle it will require hard political choices, cross-border coordination, and transparency that is painful but necessary. The alternative is more of the same: more rivers fouled, more budgets hollowed, and more lives wrecked in the shadow of a black market that keeps getting richer while nations grow poorer. When the first rays of dawn sweep across the dusty borders between Nigeria, Benin, and Niger, the remnants of another night's work glimmer faintly: crushed jerrycans, oil-stained gloves, and the deep ruts left by overloaded motorbikes that vanished into the horizon before sunrise. To the untrained eye, it's just another morning in a forgotten outpost. But to those who live here, these scars in the dirt are traces of an empire, a black market dynasty that fuels cities, finances warlords, and manipulates entire governments while remaining invisible to the public eye. The cartel behind Africa's oil smuggling doesn't have a face. It doesn't need one. Its power lies in its anonymity, an intricate web of businessmen, local smugglers, generals, and politicians who all play their roles in a choreography of corruption that has perfected itself over decades. What began as small-time trading and subsidized fuel has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with roots that stretch from rural creeks to European boardrooms. Beneath the chaos lies a cold logic: control the flow of fuel, and you control life itself. In regions where generators power hospitals, pumps draw water, and motorbikes carry goods across barren distances, fuel is survival. By monopolizing the black market supply chain, these cartels wield influence not just over commerce, but over communities, governments, and sometimes wars. Governments often promise to crush the trade: televised raids, fiery speeches, and dramatic arrests. But what happens after the cameras turn away is always the same. A few low-level smugglers disappear, a storage depot burns, and weeks later, the same operations resume, only smarter, deeper underground, and protected by people who can't be touched. Because the truth is, this network isn't just tolerated, it's protected. Inside ministries, some officials earn more from turning a blind eye than from their actual salaries. Customs officers collect road taxes at checkpoints that never appear in any ledger. Politicians' campaigns are quietly financed by donations from shadow fuel barons. Every link in the chain buys the silence of the next, forming a system so complete that breaking it would mean confronting the very machinery of governance itself. And so, the trucks roll on, hundreds of them each week. Some carry fake papers, signed by complicit port authorities. Others are escorted by vehicles with official insignia. Even when seized, most of the cargo never reaches evidence rooms. Somewhere between the arrest and the courthouse, the trucks vanish. The product reappears days later at a roadside stall or a suburban depot, ready for resale. It's a cycle so efficient, it mimics a legitimate supply chain. Except this one thrives on theft. As the stolen fuel moves, so does the money. Cash doesn't stay local for long. It's converted into foreign currency, funneled through fake import-export firms, and washed clean in real estate, shipping, and luxury cars. Bank accounts in Dubai, Malta, or Cyprus hold funds linked to ghost companies registered in the Caribbean. In Lagos, Katana, and Tripoli, expensive villas rise from the profits of the trade. But money isn't the only export. Influence travels to smuggling empires buy more than luxury. They buy loyalty. Militias guarding oil installations in the Niger Delta receive shipments of weapons, food, and vehicles from the same people who profit from the oil they steal. In Libya, rival militias form temporary alliances to share refinery access and tanker routes, splitting territories like warlords of a vanished empire. These arrangements rarely last, but as long as the barrels keep flowing, peace is not the goal. Profit is. In many ways, the cartel mirrors the states it undermines. It has hierarchy, bureaucracy, diplomacy, even its own economy. Internal disputes are settled through arbitration by senior brokers. Operations are financed through loans from informal lenders. Workers are paid weekly wages. In border towns, it's not unusual to find entire communities dependent on the trade. Families who store, transport, or sell contraband fuel because it's the only livelihood available. When governments crack down, it's these families who suffer first. The paradox is tragic. The same people who suffer from the consequences of corruption often defend the very networks that exploit them. To them, the cartel is not a criminal entity. It's the employer, the provider, the one reliable source of income in a region abandoned by the state. Try shutting it down, and you invite unrest. Try reforming it, and you challenge the political order. Meanwhile, in Europe, the story continues under a different name. When Maltese investigators began tracing suspicious tankers entering their ports, they discovered shipments originating in Libyan waters, fuel sold at a fraction of the market price, carried by vessels that routinely switched off their tracking systems. The oil was laundered by blending it with legal product, rebranded as Mediterranean stock, and distributed across the EU. The profits were staggering. One smuggler's testimony revealed the scale. Over 50 million liters moved in a single year through falsified shipping manifests and shell companies. Each delivery was worth millions, but only a fraction reached official records. The rest disappeared into a labyrinth of offshore accounts. What began as a regional crime had quietly become an international racket. The global nature of the trade means accountability is elusive. Shipping companies claim ignorance. Banks cite client confidentiality. Governments point fingers at one another. Everyone is complicit, and yet no one is guilty. The cartel thrives in those gray zones between jurisdictions. between legality and illegality, between the state and the shadows. Still, not all is hidden. In Nigeria's creeks, illegal refineries dot the mangrove swamps, metal drums, makeshift pipes, and open flames licking crude oil into low-grade diesel. Thick smoke drifts over the water, staining the sky. Locals call it CHP fire, fire of poverty. It poisons the land and the lungs of those who depend on it. Children cough as black residue settles on their skin. Rivers once teeming with fish now carry oil slicks that shimmer like glass. And yet, the work continues. Because the alternative is hunger, government forces occasionally descend on these areas, torching refineries, arresting workers, destroying drums. For a day or two, the swamp is silent. Then, as if on cue, the fires return. New sites, new operators, same routine. Desperation is a renewable resource. In North Africa, the trade takes on a more militarized form. In post-Gaddafi Libya, oil smuggling became one of the few stable industries. Competing militias turned refineries and coastal ports into private fiefs. Tribal leaders, local businessmen, and militia commanders formed temporary coalitions to control smuggling routes toward Tunisia and the Mediterranean. The state, fragmented and fragile, watched from afar, powerless or unwilling to intervene. European demand only fueled the chaos. As legal imports dwindled and black market prices soared, European brokers turned to illicit suppliers. With every deal struck, the cycle deepened. European consumers, often unaware, filled their cars with fuel that had passed through the hands of warlords and criminals. Every liter sold overseas strengthened the grip of the networks that destabilize Africa's fragile states. The irony is bitter. The continent richest in energy resources remains home to some of the most energy-poor populations. In regions where billions of dollars worth of oil vanish each year, families still cook over wood fires. Cities suffer power outages while tankers carry stolen fuel to foreign markets. Corruption has inverted reality, turning wealth into scarcity, abundance into deprivation. But cracks are beginning to show. Investigative journalists, whistleblowers, and a new generation of prosecutors are peeling back the layers of secrecy. In Italy, Malta, and the Netherlands, cases have emerged linking European traders to African smuggling rings. Some convictions have been secured. Others remain stalled in endless legal disputes. The cartels, as always, adapt. New companies appear, old names vanish, and the pipeline continues. Yet the tide of exposure is rising. Satellite monitoring of ships, blockchain-based fuel tracking, and tighter financial regulations are making it harder to hide. International watchdogs are sharing intelligence across borders. Countries like Nigeria and Ghana have begun digitizing supply chains to detect diversions early. But technology alone cannot defeat greed, and greed, in this story, is boundless. The cartel's power lies in the weakness of institutions. When law enforcement is corrupt, when the courts can be bought, when politics is for sale, crime becomes just another form of governance. That is the final truth of the smuggling empire. It doesn't operate outside the system. It is the system. It feeds on dysfunction, thrives on poverty, and survives on complicity. Still, every empire falls, not by force, but by exhaustion. The fuel cartel is no exception. Its greed consumes the very resources that sustain it. Rivers polluted beyond repair, fields scorched by refining fires, economies drained of revenue eventually. Even profit loses meaning when everything else collapses. What remains is ruin, and perhaps that is where change begins. Not from moral awakening, but from necessity. When governments can no longer afford the losses, when citizens demand accountability, when nations realize that no development is possible, while billions bleed away in the shadows, that's when the reckoning comes. The fall of the cartel won't come overnight. It will come piece by piece. A whistleblower here, a seized tanker there, a quiet reform that suddenly holds. Each exposure cuts another thread in the web of silence. It's slow, painful, and dangerous, but it's happening. Until then, the fuel will keep flowing, through forests, over borders, across seas, a silent river of stolen wealth, lighting cities that never knew its origin, filling pockets that will never admit their crime. This is the empire of shadows, the cartel that built a nation of thieves, a continent of stolen fire. Its story is still being written, in every shipment that vanishes and every tank that burns, and somewhere, beneath the smoke and the greed, lies a truth too stark to ignore. Africa's greatest theft is not just its oil, it is its future, drained drop by drop, in the name of power, profit, and silence.